We're good.
We're live?
Yeah.
Hi. Hi, everyone. Just give me one more minute to finish the marketing here, and we will get started. And then as you join in, I'm going to say hello to all the people that said hi already. And today we are going to be working on knees. Oops.
I had a really good knee pun earlier too, and I can't remember it right now.
I keep reusing knee deep and need.
Yeah.
All right, there we go. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Tim Von Rueden with ConceptCookie.com, and I'm joined by Joe Chico.
Hello.
He will be the moderator for the day. And today we're going to be taking a look at drawing knees. Oh, I guess this is a Concept Cookie live stream. We do these every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Central Time, and outside of the States, it's -5 GMT. And as always, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them on the side. That's kind of why we do these, and hopefully give you guys a better understanding of not only the topic at hand, but maybe something you might be wondering as well. And it could relate to anything that's in digital art. It could relate to getting a job, going to school, my advice or tips on anything that might hopefully pertain to what the subject matter is for the week. So especially things about skin or what color palettes to choose, or working with the bones and kind of understanding underlying anatomy. So that's kind of what we're going to be working on today. And then, yeah, I think those are the big announcements. And I think we can just go ahead and get started, unless, Joe, you can think of anything off the bat.
Do you just want to answer last week's question?
Sure. Let me hear it real quick.
I believe it was from the user LoveJinx33, and they said...
LoveJinx33?
Yep. How do you choose your DPI size? Does it change when you change your canvas size, or do you use the same every time?
So for my canvas size, I always have it at a 300 DPI, and that's pretty much for the resolution, so that's how many pixels are per inch. And even if I'm working on something that's 3 inches big compared to something that might be an 11 by 17, I always stick at the same DPI of 300. Since I'm doing conventions and I'm doing a lot of stuff where I don't know if it needs to be printed or not, I always just do it just as a safeguard to always have it at a 300 DPI for the print. So yeah, okay, so now let's get started, and I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about knees. Over the weekend, I played through an RPG, which I haven't done in like 3 or 4 years, and it's called The Last Story. And while I think the gameplay and the story itself was kind of tripping over itself a lot, the one thing that was really fantastic are the character designs. And particularly in the way that the artist, and I think it's Kimihiko, I don't want to bash the last name because I can't think of it off the top of my head, but the artist really focuses on joints and the parts of the body that are usually more hidden. And I like to see how they can be really expressive. So rather than like hiding your hands, like I see this a lot, especially with younger artists, where with hands, they might put the hands behind the back, they'll put the hands in the pocket, or they're not really sure what to do. But this artist does the complete opposite and lets like the hands and the wrists be kind of the vocal point for expression, and they're in the foreground, or they are doing something dramatic, or they're posed in a way that's really elegant. And it's really interesting to see someone be really confident with the parts of the body that sometimes people try to shy away from more. So in this case, I think originally I was going to do wrists and ankles, but I decided to switch it to the knees, just because I think I'm a little more familiar with the knees than I am doing wrist or ankle, so I kind of wanted to, oops, let me turn that off. So I wanted to at least share some information on that. Alright, so I'm going to hide some of this stuff. So the first thing I guess I should talk about is how important it is to study anatomy. Now for me, I don't think it's important to understand the names of all the anatomical features, as long as you get the general idea of how they're shaped, some like ideas in your head of how to remember them and be able to execute them in a way that's accurate and proportional. So let me give you an example here. So the first thing that I want you guys to do is use reference. I think drawing from it blind can really hurt the way that you draw anything, not only just the knee, but anything in particular. And especially when I went to, let me see if I can find it. I was looking for knee reference. And one of the first ones I found, it was very inaccurate, and I don't think I'll be able to find it now that I'm actually looking for it. But pretty much when you draw the knee, let me grab another color here. All right. So the one thing I see a lot, at least when I taught at AI for 2 semesters, and it was kind of the basics of drawing. And the one thing I noticed when we got into like the figure study stuff was I saw a lot of this for the knees, where it was like, and do my best to recreate this, where it'd be like 2 lines that kind of slowly would incline toward each other, and then it would be another one underneath of it. And mind you, this was more of like a realistic study, but it was blind. So there was no model in front of them. It was their interpretation of drawing a character, and this is often what I would see. Or the other thing that I would see would be the hourglass leg. So let me see if I can recreate it here. And then just a line right there. So I guess in these 2 scenarios, I would rather see this one, but that's not to say that this one's completely inaccurate. The one thing I do want to see is I want to start seeing these little nuances, but start to use them accurately. So let me pull up what a real knee looks like, because I think trying to draw a knee without actually having physical reference of an actual knee will hurt you. And oftentimes I like to look at a drawing of a knee too to get both spectrums. So let's see if I can get 2 of them really quick. I guess, is there any questions that I can answer during this?
One from Asman Gaming. It says, "Hey, in a few months I'm going to art school, and I must do art tests, still life drawing, and I would like to know how to get really better at drawing and shading a still life. Can you give me some tips?"
For still life, especially the way that you're asking the question, this is kind of how I run my workshop, and when I teach people, I talk about really being analytical, and when you're looking at something, you're not just observing it, but you're analyzing it. So you have to look at it for more than what it appears. So really look at how lighting influences it, look at the way the material reflects or absorbs lighting, but not only that, does it have a smooth surface, is it more irregular, is there a pattern to it? And in this case, if you're doing still life, I think it would be a good idea for you to do something that's organic. So do a piece of fruit, I don't know, apple, orange, whatever it is, and then do something that's inorganic. So maybe like a screw bolt, something that has a lot of hard edges, and it can definitely showcase your understanding of lighting. And I think that would be the best still life that you could do.
Tim, I'm going to go AFK really fast.
All right. So then from here, I'm also going to pull up real knee. So let me just quickly on Google. And I always see a lot of pictures of arrow to the knee now. That was like one of the first 10 in my reference here. All right. As you can see, over here. So while the idea of the knee is correct, there is inward on the outside. Actually, let me make a new layer on top of this. So there's an inward on the top, and then it goes around. So there is this curve right here. So on the hourglass, that's correct. But you can see on the other side how it's actually like a 3-point type system, or a 2-point. And in my reference pictures, you can kind of see what I'm talking about. But knees are very different. Don't just think of them, and definitely don't think of them as just 2 straight lines. Or I think that's the worst thing you could do. even if you are wanting to be an animator or doing something that's a little more cartoony or not as realistic, I think it's still good to understand the accuracy of actual anatomy and proportions and then apply that to your own work. So some things, like when you watch like Adventure Time or cartoons that are successful, they have a style to the way that they draw everything. So obviously they're not looking to recreate knees in the most accurate, realistic way. But I'm sure most of the artists have a solid understanding of what the knee does look like and how to recreate that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to sketch out the knee here. And then from the front view, so I think I'm going to do, so imagine if this was one leg, this would be like the outside. Knee would be here. So I'm not going to draw both sides of the legs, or both legs, I should say. I'm just going to draw one of them and then kind of copy and paste one over. Because this isn't so much on drawing two, just let's focus on making one look really nice. Okay, so if this was the front view of a person, when I look at the outside hip, so there'd be a hip here, and they're a little different depending on if they're male or female, but in this case, I guess let's do a male, and we'll work from that, because the male typically has a little more muscle structure seen from the outside. So the first thing is there's usually a bump right here, and then we get into the top of the leg. And the other thing I'm going to pull up is our very own leg anatomy reference. So I'm going to pull that up really quick. And a lot of you guys have been asking for anatomy, a full course, and I think that's going to be one of the first things I do in 2015, just because of how important I think it is to have a full, not even a full understanding of the actual terms and the names of the anatomy, but having tips and tricks to help you be able to draw them at any given notice.
I'm back. Sorry about that.
You're good. So I'm pulling up the knee reference here. You know what? I think I have the PSD. Let me pull that up instead. Alright, so if you go to conceptcookie.com, you can download the anatomy structures of the entire parts of the body. So this is one of them, and the way that I have it set up is on the different layers of the PSD, you can turn on and off the different bones, muscles, and the skin layer, so the outside skin layer, and then when you turn them all on, you should be able to see all of them and be able to, if I only wanted to see the bones in the leg, I could turn off the muscle, and you can kind of see how the bones interact with the skin underneath. So I think having this kind of a resource up as you do this kind of stuff is also great. But even here you can tell on the outside of the leg there's an hourglass, and on the inside there's a 2-point. So it's something to just always keep in mind. The inside of the legs are usually more complex than the outside. So now if I go back to drawing here, okay, so like I said, I'm not going to try to focus on the legs too much, but I'm going to kind of explain why understanding the leg parts are important to draw the knees. Okay, so then when you think of legs, I remember when I first learned the muscle anatomy underneath, I was kind of blown away by the shapes that are underneath the skin itself, where it looks like there's two sort of like teardrop, eye drop shape muscles here, and then there's one that's kind of like upside down here. So that's kind of what I always think about when I'm drawing the upper leg. So in most cases we just see like a thick mass on the top, but really there's like these 3 teardrops, and it's this really interesting pattern that isn't as seen on the surface as much depending on how much body fat the person has, but it's something to always kind of keep in mind for when you're doing the shadows, because then the form would have a slightly hint of a shadow here and here. And then get into the knee part. So on the outside, like I keep I'm just going to keep re-emphasizing the outside of the knee, or the leg in general, is more simple. Curves back around. Then on the inside, so this is where it gets a little different. So the reason there is even this first point is there's a strand. I can't remember if it's a tendon or a muscle itself that comes around here and wraps all the way up. So it's almost like it's pulling the muscle in toward the leg. So that's what's giving us this first bump. And then this one extends out. And the knee. And the other thing about the knee is if you really look at a knee, they're not angled perfectly up and down. They usually have a slight curve to them. Or not a curve, but they're slightly angled inward. So when I think of the knee, even if they're standing straight, I'll always draw it slightly off-center. So it won't just be like a perfect box here. It'll always be like slightly angled. And then on the bottom here, you know that the calf is behind this part of the leg, so that's where the bump in the back comes from. Then it would go down into the leg part, or more into like the ankle part. Now the front of the leg I always found really fun to draw because there are, actually this should be a little bigger here, but there's a muscle that wraps around here and then kind of goes straight down. So there's a cool little curve to it, depending on how much emphasis you put on it. And you can kind of see it in the reference photo. It's like right here. And it wraps under the knee and then goes straight down into the leg. And on the other side, they have one of those too, but it's not as pronounced usually. And then that one goes straight down the center as well. So with a different color, let me kind of highlight the main parts here. All right, so when drawing the leg, think of that the teardrop that goes around, and then it's being squished right there. And that's how I always remember the top of the leg. The outside of the leg is usually more simple. You can think more hourglass, but that's not to say you should have it like just be a completely smooth line. Having little nuances, especially near the knee area, can add a lot of detail and realism to it. But for the most part, the general idea is more of an hourglass. The inside of the leg is always more complex, where there'll be the 1 point because it's being pulled right here, 2 point to where the top of the knee is, and then depending on how pronounced the knees are, there will probably be a point right here, and then it'll wrap around into the rest of the leg. So the inside of the leg has a lot of points compared to the outside. And then the knee itself, for now, until we get into shading it, you can think of it as a rounded, not a perfect square, but think of it as your kneecap. And the kneecap itself, later we're going to kind of split in two, but for the most part it's almost like an egg shape, but the top is a little more flat. And then the bottom of the leg, you can always just think of, there's these two on either side that slowly kind of come together, but not to a perfect point down here, but they wrap around the knee. So the knee itself doesn't have that much muscle around it, but it has a lot of tendons, and there's a lot of joint action going on. So what I'm going to do is I want to go ahead and make these smaller. And we're going to sketch some knees out.
Well, I'm going to throw some questions at you.
Yeah.
All right. Question from William. Hey, Tim. I'm partially colorblind in the red-green spectrum. Have you worked with artists that have this disability? I found that digital painting has been a good thing for me, color picking. Any thoughts?
Yes. I actually talked to someone specifically about this and like how I describe color to someone that can't see color, so it's completely colorblind. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought about having other sensory kind of descriptive words describe colors. Like when I think of red, I think of heat. So now I would literally have them have, or like think of just any times they've been warm or hot, and that would describe red. Or cold would be more of like a blue or a white, frigid. But in your case, for digital art with color picking, it's kind of like looking at your piece in grayscale. And I don't have the perspective because I'm not colorblind, but the great thing that you do have is you can see values probably a little more accurate than other people, because sometimes when people choose colors, they're choosing colors that are way too saturated. But in your case, you would see that it's way too bright. So like, I guess the best way to explain that would be to show an example. All right, so these colors are the same hue, but they're at different values. So let me go ahead, and they're slightly different saturations. So now, okay, so with these colors, you might be thinking, okay, obviously the top one has the lightest value, and then maybe it goes downward in order. But if I turn the saturation all the way off, you can see how the most saturated one, which was right here, if I turn that on and off, or the most eye-catching, is actually a little darker in value than the one down here, which might be deceiving. But if you're not able to see the hue itself, you'd be able to see this more accurately. But that's not to say, like, I am sorry for your condition. I couldn't imagine what it might be like, but it seems like this seems to be like almost therapeutic, like a helping thing for you. So that actually makes me really happy to hear that. I'm glad that you're doing it.
Dana says, "Hey Tim, I was wondering what inspires you? Any particular music, TV shows, movies, art, artists, etc. I'm also looking for some inspiration and was hoping to get a couple ideas to help me push me along. Thanks."
Oh my God, this is like, I could talk about that one all day. I love this question. But I guess to keep it within a reason of me answering this, I guess I'll keep it a little shorter and sweeter. So I guess in terms of music, the one thing I usually listen to is orchestrated music, things that either have a soft piano, violin, and cello, that are the combination of the three. Usually nothing too dramatic, a little softer. Those are something I can usually pass the time to. But if not that, usually songs that are a little more melancholy. Definitely a lot of Lana Del Rey. And in terms of what inspires me in general, I guess things that are very strange or unorthodox inspire me. The other day, actually last night, I was drawing in my sketchbook before I went to bed, and there was a fly that landed on my sketchbook, and like my reaction was immediately to smash it. But when I did, I didn't really squish it, but I killed it, surprisingly, but it like stayed intact. But I felt like the weirdest person last night because I was like studying the fly, and I was looking at the way that its wings are shaped and the different vertebrae, or I was looking at the legs and how interesting the joints are and how they connect. And I was integrating that in my drawing. So sometimes it might be something so strange that inspires me, and it's usually never something that I plan. Sometimes my greatest inspiration comes from things that just happen in my life, and then I integrate that into my drawings. So I guess that would be my greatest inspiration. But that's not to say you can't force inspiration. So definitely, like over the weekend, I was playing The Last Story, and I did it all weekend. And I was incredibly inspired by the way that they handled the metal armor and the architecture, or not the architecture, but in the way they did the decorative designs in the metal of these helmets and how strong they were. And I really wanted to draw like a metal helmet, which I've never really had that urge before, but I'm sure in my next pencil sketch drawing, that's what I'll be drawing. So I guess keep the world around you like make sure you open your visual eyes to anything and everything that happens to you and let things come naturally, but also force it to some degree. And I think seeing movies and playing games, playing games you really have to limit yourself to. You don't want to go overboard. But there is some legit studying that you can do. Like I play League of Legends maybe once every other day, every 3 days. And I always get inspired by the latest characters that they have, the new splash art or the skins. Look at the way that the illustrators drew it. So I guess that's where I kind of pull inspiration as well. But yeah, I mean, I could talk about this all day. So we better keep it moving, or else I'll get stuck in talking about movies. Because I would also consider myself a huge fan of movies, and I could discuss it with someone all day.
William, who was the person that talked about the can't see red and green, he says you're correct with the shade and values. I tend to see them more clearly.
Awesome.
Mervsan is asking about the DPS size. So we already answered that, right?
Yeah.
All right.
But in case he missed it, 300. And that's what I use for everything.
Man, a lot of questions. That was good. Hey Tim, how do you make your line art so straight and smooth?
I don't. I think that's something I try to admit to you guys every week, is that I don't believe my line art is that strong. Where if I zoom in, like, look, it's very chicken scratchy. And it's something that my high school teacher was like so angry with me all the time because I always do chicken scratch. And it's something that it's not as confident looking. And I agree, where my lines aren't that great in Photoshop. But I will say, on paper, I've definitely did the transition of keeping my lines more fluid, going with ongoing lines, trying to find shapes and forms in the lines that I create. But when it comes to digital art, I'm so structured and meticulous with how I'm laying down my brushstrokes that it always comes out a little more chicken scratchy. I mean, I thank you if you think it looks clean, but it's usually because you're looking at it from far away. If I zoomed in, it's really not that clean.
Oloriel says, I'm struggling with understanding form. Any exercises or studies you can recommend to help that?
Yeah, we actually have a few on Concept Cookie. Doing the basics, and I know that they can get kind of boring doing like sphere studies or cube, what are those, cones or cylinders. But they do have a fundamental understanding that I think is important for any digital artist to understand, and not only just understand, but fully realize like how those four shapes can be applied to anything, and kind of using that knowledge over and over then. But if you want to do something that's a little more fun, even like a shape challenge, the shape challenge that's going on right now, the exercise that's going on like legit right now, is one that you can apply your own forms, but then really try to render them out in a way that gives them value and gives them that sense of form, and that's usually it's due to lighting. So form is usually created, form and value itself are usually created from lighting, but it can also be created from hue contrast. So that's something that you kind of have to decide what path you want to go down, and that's something I've been struggling lately with, is figuring out how do you want to create form, and that's something maybe you should ask yourself, like what artist do you look up to, and then kind of tailor it to your own style, I guess.
I would also recommend doing bump map studies and wireframe studies, because that helped me a lot with understanding how to actually see a form, as opposed to just like drawing a circle and being like, okay, well, what makes this a sphere now, you know?
Mm-hmm. All right, really quick. So in this leg drawing that I've done here, you can see how the outside is more hourglass, inside is more complicated. But if you break it down, it's not as complicated. So then we have that the triple eyedrop thing up here with the point where it's being pulled in. Then on the bottom, you can see how I have these lines that indicate those inward lines that are right here. And then the knee itself, it's like this egg with a flattened top, and it's kind of like broken down in the center. And then the way that we shade it with color is going to really be able to tell the story of this is a knee. So why don't I get into starting to do that too?
Louise Hampson says, never heard drawing lines referred to as chicken scratch. I've always known it as feathering.
Oh, well, sounds a little better than chicken scratching.
Connor would like to know, is there a place to see old live streams?
Yeah, we actually have the entire, well, not, I will say there's about 10 to 20 that weren't uploaded correctly, but the past like 8 months have all been added correctly to our YouTube page. So on our YouTube page, you just type in Concept Cookie, and on our homepage we have playlists, and one of them is called Live Streams, and you can check them all out there. Now, where's my color palette? There we go. So I'm going to use the color palette that I used when I created the image on the left here. So I'm going to hide that again. Oop. I would do it on that layer. There we go. Alright, so I'm going to show you how I usually color skin. And you know what, I'm going to do it to the 3 knees here, or maybe just these 2, so not the battle damaged knee. And I'm going to be doing this all with a soft brush, because I even got a message this morning talking about how grateful they were that I do these live streams and I don't use fancy brushes and I don't try to use Photoshop tricks, where it really is important for you guys to know you can create anything just using the basics. And the method that I've seemed to be using a lot lately is my soft brush method, which I have a full tutorial on if this is something that might interest you. Make my knee outline darker so you guys can see it.
Reneto asks, hey Tim and Joe, I enjoy more the painting process than the drawing process, both digital and traditional, and I end up with a bad drawing that affects the overall quality of my painting. Any tips on sticking drawing more than painting? Thanks.
He's talking traditionally too.
Yes.
I guess then making the drawing process, especially digital, make it feel more like you're painting. And there's some tools in Photoshop, especially like the smudge tool, or there are actual built-in brushes that come standard in Photoshop CS5 and 6 that try to replicate using real-life traditional brushes. But I will say, if you're looking for that true, like a more authentic look, try Corel Painter. Their whole program and software is based on people that come from a traditional painting background, and they try to recreate watercolor and acrylics and oils to the best of their ability in a digital format. So I think that would probably be a good, at least try it out. It's a free 30-day trial type deal, and it's something that you might really enjoy. And I think that'll make the drawing process, or even the transition from traditional to digital, a little easier, because then you're more in your comfort zone.
Asman Gaming, do you have any favorite art books or books that you would recommend for artists?
Ayo, I actually pulled one of them up before I did the stream. Hold on, let me show you really quick. Alright. I feel like every week I recommend this book. It's called Drawing Human Anatomy by Giovanni Savardi. And the reason that I like it, and especially for this live stream in particular, is the way that he draws anatomy and the way that he represents human form is a lot more accurate, in my opinion, than the usual anatomy books. Like, even the anatomy books that I like, oftentimes they're more of unrealistic proportions, where they're almost close to bodybuilders. And in my opinion, that might be like 0.5% of the actual population of people, where most people are either lean or they have a little bit more body fat percentage on them. But then what's really neat is seeing things like the way that he focuses on veins and tension and I guess what people might consider the ugly side of the human body, where it's not as pretty or smooth. But I like that. I like seeing the nitty and gritty. And I love seeing the different muscles being described underneath the skin and how they might tense up when he's doing certain positions. So this book definitely. And then there's two books that we actually gave perfect reviews on Concept Cookie itself. Let me switch back to my picture here. It is the Bravely Default art book, and that one I really enjoy that one. And then the Avatar book, I believe, was the second one. But in terms of what is my favorite art book, that's a tough one. I would probably have to go with the Bravely Default one, just because of how much content is in it, and it really is fantastic. Oh no, I'm sorry, The Last of Us. That was the other perfect reviewed score so far on Concept Cookie. And if there's a book that you want us to review, if you send me just a suggestion, there's a good chance that I may have it and that I would do a review of it, in case you wanted to know if you want to buy it or not.
Angela asks, "Hey, I feel I have learned a lot about drawing just within the first 10 minutes. I fail in anatomy, but all books are so complex. Could you recommend a way of learning anatomy with this kind of simple explanation? Some books or live stream pages? Thanks."
Yes. So the way that I create, let me see if I can find them really quick. I think I would. Okay, let me share it out really quick. So pretty much what I try to do with Concept Cookies tutorials, and let me share out my screen. You're going to see me for a second. Alright, so on our DeviantArt page, oops, you'll be able to see all the stuff that we offer and all the quick little tips. But in terms of anatomy, which is what I think you're talking about, so usually what I try to do is I try to break it down into as simple terms as possible, because I think it becomes convoluted when you start throwing in all this different information that you're not able to comprehend or like absorb any of it because it's too much. It's overwhelming. So what I try to do is just break it down one by one. So the first thing that we learn, the hands curve. They aren't perfectly straight, and they aren't like perfectly sized. So you can definitely see the difference there. So then once we have that kind of understood, then we go to the next thing. And I guess you could go right or down depending on which. But I try to do that with not only the hands, but I try to do it with the ears, simplifying the ears. So the way that when I ever look at an ear, I always think of the hook, the Y, and then there's a bump. So whenever I draw ears, I always have that in the back of my head, and I'm hoping that you guys will be able to maybe pick up some of these tricks and be able to apply them in your life or in your own pieces, because sometimes, like if you just look at an ear, it might just be like, oh, this is so, like, I don't understand what's going on. How would I be able to remember this without using reference? But then you might also think, okay, well, I know there was that hook Y bump thing. Let me see if I can figure it out from there. So hopefully that's kind of the goal with Concept Cookie, is being able to draw something in simple terms and have it be broken down into a way that's easy to understand. Oh, I gotta share my drawing again. There we go.
Effrey says, "I used to be an adventurer like you."
What?
She says, "I used to be an adventurer like you."
An adventurer?
It's a Skyrim joke about the arrow in the knee.
Oh, yeah.
What should you think about if you're interested in animation?
If you're into animation, what should
Yeah.
you think about?
Yeah.
Alright, my first guess is going to be animation. But you really have to study it. Animation is definitely not my field of interest, or something that I don't think I could ever do, just because of how much of a perfectionist I think I can be with my own work. But I know Joe has definitely tackled into this a little bit, but you really have to understand and be passionate about it, because you have to invest a lot of time in creating animation, especially 2D animation. It's a lot of work. So if you're up to it, just know what you're getting into before you sign up for it. And then Joe, I mean, do you have any other tips, I guess?
I mean, you hit it pretty much on the head. The biggest thing with animation is that there's going to be a lot of studying and trying to understand Uh, I mean, whew, perspective, gesture, um, form. I mean, the list goes on, and you have to be able to think about how force applies to things as well. Um, it's a lot of studying, and I would recommend. There's a book I believe called Force. Um, it's like a blue book with a gesture drawing on the front of it. It's a really good book. There's also the Animators Survival book that's really good. Um, I would just recommend that if you want to go into animation, you go into animation, like you go like headfirst into it, because it's a lot of fun. When you start off, it may not like you drawing like frame by frame stuff. You're like, man, this is really annoying. But then like when you finish something, it's such a rewarding feeling because it's a moving picture.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's my 2 cents on animation.
I guess really quick, the things that I've been doing. So the first three layers were my skin bases, or my skin base, I should say, like foundation. And then you can see how flat it reads. So now we got to start integrating other colors because skin is not just pale, dark pale, and light pale. You definitely have to pull other colors. And I usually like to do, so the three colors on the right are kind of my warm hues that I want to start integrating. So the first layer I did was I added some red. And you'll see this a lot, especially with anime artists, is they'll make the elbows, the knees, and sometimes the nose have like a red-ish tint to it. And I'm kind of doing the same thing because oftentimes those areas are a little bit more red, and having that gradient from the red area of the knee to the sort of less red area of like the upper thigh and the middle part of the lower knee or of the lower leg gives us that nice kind of color contrast. And the other thing I started doing was adding this warm light color to start really kind of amping up the three-dimensional forms that we have of the legs. So while I'm doing this, I'm thinking of that underlying muscle structure, and that's how I'm shading it. So I'm almost thinking of there's a teardrop here, there's a teardrop here, and since they're kind of round, oh, that looked kind of bad for a second. Since they're kind of round, I'm going to shade it as if it was a round object. Now the hard part is going to be a little bit later when we're trying to define these little details, but I'll get into that after I do kind of a pass of this light color first. And I'll keep answering questions till I get to that point.
Micah, I've been studying nature, but I have many problems with drawing it. What is a good way to learn how to draw nature?
Ooh, that's my favorite. Things that are organic I find so interesting. The one thing you can be aware of is you don't have to be perfect with nature stuff. So if you have a tree branch that's a little more bent than the way it actually looks, you can get away with it. And the other thing is try to keep everything a little more fluid and not so structured. Because even a tree that looks perfectly straight probably has like these little bumps and edges on the actual edge of where the bark is, and adding those little details can add so much more to your piece. And what would be the other thing I would say for nature? If you're trying to do nature in Photoshop, like you're trying to recreate in a digital format, I will say that's a little harder. Because environment stuff is usually, I can honestly admit, is not my skill. I don't consider myself very well adapted to doing environment art. And that's because you have to be a little quicker and you can't rely so much on lighting techniques, where you really have to rely on your placement of your brush strokes and keeping it or having it imply like trees or branches, but quickly. So it's oftentimes brushes will really help with that too. And I'm grabbing the very lightest color, making my brush smaller. Start to isolate these highlights here.
Robert Blake asks, "Hi Tim, I was wondering how much perspective I need to know for figure drawing. I just want to know where to start."
Me and Joe always kind of get in discussions about this, where I don't think having that great of an understanding of perspective is important because of being able to look at something and recreate it. But then I do understand Joe's point of, well, maybe that's because that's just how you see it. You already see the perspective and understand it without actually having to like do studies of it. So in my, I guess, opinion, it's not as important, but if you're someone that maybe struggles with perspective, then yeah, I think doing studies enough to where you could look at it and be like, this looks accurate, would probably be a good starting point.
Another question kind of related to that from I'm Ben J. Hey, I love drawing comic book poses, especially Spider-Man, but I have a bit of a hard time making them really dynamic. I've recently started figure and gesture drawing. Any tips on dynamic drawing and foreshortening perspective if you have time?
Actually, Joe, this might be your question.
Any tips on dynamic and perspective? I mean, if you're taking figure and gesture drawing classes, those most likely won't be doing crazy foreshortening. I know a lot of books that teach just like the basic idea of extreme foreshortening, even with like a fisheye lens and stuff like that, will kind of explain it, but not on an anatomical level, like I believe you're talking about. I know a lot of those like how to draw comics books like they talk about it, but it's really difficult to dissect what they're discussing. And I would say the biggest thing that you could probably do for that is breaking down simple forms and understanding how those simple forms can sit in perspective, like a fist being a cube, and then that's attached to a circle, and making sure that the cube is overlaying over the circle, or the sphere, sphere, because that's the three-dimensional form. And then the sphere would technically be smaller, so you might, depending on the angle, you might not even see that sphere, but it's a good idea to draw through the forms. And so like that sphere, which would represent, the wrist, would attach to a cylinder-like object that would be the forearm. And that's how you can start to understand how things would fall into perspective. And that's just coming from like a grid layout perspective, so that way you can capture really dynamic poses like that. Yeah.
That was good. And I guess for those of you who might have been wondering, so I took the base layer and I started erasing the outside edge because shortly I'm going to try to hide this line art layer. So you can see when I turn it on and off how there's still some blurry areas and I don't want my knee to look blurry. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in once so you guys can see this better. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at all the edges where they are, like, let me point them out. It's like right here, and I can see that initially I drew right there. I can see some shadow indication lines, and I'm going to use those to my benefit because then when I hide the line art layer, you can see how they kind of get lost. So then I'm going to look at the entire area of the knee and recreate, or kind of push those shadows a little further just by using contrast. So even just a little bit, let's see what it looks like when I turn the line art layer off now. So you can see how we're starting to recreate it, and then from here I don't even need my line art because I have kind of the guide to tell me where the muscle ends.
Diego King. Hey Tim, how would you paint the shadows and lights in a multicolor surface? Like if half of the leg was brown and the other upper half was yellow, and the middle is as a gradient between these two colors.
Wait, say that again.
How would you paint the shadow and lights in a multicolor surface? Like if half of the leg was brown and the other half was yellow, and the middle as a gradient in between those two colors.
All right, I can do that. So then the top, let me write these down so I remember. So the top half is what color? Brown?
Uh, Upper half is yellow, bottom half is brown.
Yellow and brown, and then he wants a transition between the two.
Hmm.
All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new layer. I'll mask out that leg, and I'm going to change the layer mode. Let's do color. So the top half is going to be yellow, and the bottom half is going to be brown. I'm trying to grab my best brown here. Let me see what that looks like in hue. Yeah, I'm going to keep it at color. All right, so the transition between the two, actually that's a really yellow upper thigh there. So pretty much you want to keep it gradual and not have it be too blunt. So in this case, I could probably have more browns on the bottom integrated into the yellow areas, like here. Then maybe pull some of the yellow and pull it down into the brown. So it's not just a pure gradient. Like we get a transition between the two that's a little more subtle. But I would definitely still think about how lighting would affect these colors. So I'd probably amp up a highlight on the upper leg to kind of showcase this yellow a little better. And then something that I think I do too much is I overvalue the edges. So I'm going to lighten up the edge here and on the other side. Because you don't need a really harsh value transition to imply that this has value or this has a form to it. Like that. So I guess that's how I would do. And then the bottom, since it's still looking kind of light, I'll just mask it out again. I know that multiply will definitely give me a darker version of what I'm looking for here, and we can make it more brown. Like that. You get a little cooler transition there. I guess that's how I would blend my colors. But that's because I had a solid value underneath. So that's why a lot of people start in grayscale, and then they add color using either a color or hue blend mode, and that's what gives them the cool look, because they already did the work of adding the values with the grayscale. And actually, my friend Jonathan Hamilton, that's how he starts every piece. So last week I was watching him draw Lulu from Final Fantasy X, and he spent just a good amount of time just doing pure value study with his ambient occlusion shadows, or just occlusion shadows, not ambient, just occlusion shadows, and then adding color on top of that after he adds in all of his grayscale values first. Okay, and then from here, what I would probably do is there's a skin brush in the concept cookie pack just to give the skin some texture, because sometimes when I draw skin it might just look a tad flat when I'm using just a soft brush. And this isn't necessary. Like I could keep adding little subtle textures with a soft edge brush. I'm going to go ahead and use this other basic brush to give it just some texture to it.
Asman Gaming asks, what is your opinion on talent?
Yeah, this is another question I think we get asked every week, and I kind of respond the same way. So talent I look at as a trade, especially with drawing, or like because it was a craft. I think of it like a craft. And in the medieval times, when you were brought up, you could have either been a blacksmith, a baker, or in this case, a painter, and they were treated in the same way, where it's a skill that you can develop over time, and that's what will give you the status of a master if you do it for 20, 30 years, and then you can teach other people. But in the modern age, I think a lot of people disregard that whole idea, and then they look at it as they were born with it. But I don't necessarily believe that. I do believe people have an affinity for certain things. So like I think I was naturally drawn to video game character art And I think that's the way I grew up, where I grew interested in it over the years. And I think I knew from a young age I wanted to draw, and that's why I started drawing really young. So I do think that can definitely play into it. And that's why oftentimes you'll see that someone starting out in drawing when they're 18 or 19 won't nearly be, well, usually, they won't nearly be as good as someone that's been drawing since they've been 9 or 10. And that's because they've been doing it for much longer. So when people tell me, oh, you're naturally talented and this is a gift from God, I often look at them like, well, you're almost discrediting all the work that I put into it, and it almost laying it up as something that I was born with that I had no control over. Like that was something that I just had from my birth. But it's something that you really do have to work hard at. And I think it not only applies to artists in doing like what I'm doing, but animators, people in the VFX realm. And I don't think it's something that you can just throw up as talent. I think it's something that you really have to look at as a craft that they've been owning for probably their entire life.
Yeah, I think Anthony Jones just put out a video that pretty much hit the idea of talent. Uh, he just put it out on his YouTube page, and it was talking about like the idea of a basketball player and like taking a tall person. You know, they're naturally talented because they're taller than the average person, right? So they could be born naturally with that, but at the same time, like someone who practices day in, day out, you know, like is really good at basketball because they practice all the time, and like they go to the NBA, and they could be like 5'7", and they could be like Luke Longley and just like shoot three pointers like all day, is going to be better than the guy who's, you know, 7 feet tall and doesn't play at all.
Yeah.
And people will still see that guy who's really short as talented, but the idea is that he's more hardworking, you know.
But that's not to discredit the tall person either.
Yeah.
Because the tall person might have worked just as hard, but I think this is where my problem comes in. Then someone might look at the tall person and be like, well, you were born with it, where they completely discredit all the work that they might have put for it, regardless of what they were born with. In terms of like they were probably, due to their genetic code, going to be tall anyways. But I've seen a lot of tall, lanky people that suck at basketball. So like the tall ones that are good at basketball, they put in the hours and they put in the work. I think the person that's shorter has to work harder, and I think that's the difference.
Oh yeah, I was just talking from the aspect of someone just being tall and like not working at all.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Versus someone who works hard that is short.
All right, so I kind of got my knee kind of finished here for the most part. I would probably add a little more specular. Maybe I'll do that now. We got time. Actually, we still have a half hour. You know what? I'm going to then shade this downward knee, or the knee that's bent, at like a 90-degree angle as well. Or you know what? Maybe I'll zoom in really quick. And some of these edges are a little too blurry and soft for me, so I'm going to go ahead and kind of add more of a hard edge, more contrast between the values that are going on here.
Alexi? Alexi? Yeah. I've been drawing for almost a year already. I feel pretty confident in terms of sketching on paper, but every time I sketch with a tablet, I feel like pulling my arm off. What to do?
One, don't pull your arm off. You need that to
I agree.
Okay, so my transition period from paper to from traditional to digital is one that I've talked to a lot of people about. So the transition I call the 3-month hump. So I believe there's a 3-month hump that you have to get used to, not only Photoshop, which can be intimidating and definitely something that you have to start to understand, but just the idea that your focus from where you drew, so where you're looking, changes. From where your hand and the pencil are, you're changing exactly where the lead is being put on paper, to now you're looking at a screen and you're looking at a cursor that represents your brush, and you're kind of relying on that. So there's a hand-eye coordination that has to be developed, and then there's a muscle memory that'll go behind that. Because not only then do you have to learn that, but then you also have to get used to how hard you push on the tablet. You have to kind of understand the settings that there are available and how they work specifically for you and what settings are the best for you. So it can seem intimidating, but if you get through that 3-month hump, you'll be fine for the rest of doing your digital work. So don't get discouraged. Don't pull your arm off.
Jeez, that'd be terrible. Do you think it'd make that like noise?
Oh,
You just like. uh, Micah or Mika asks, have you used Magna Studio 5? If so, do you like the program?
I have not, but my good friend Pui Che, I believe, has used it multiple times, and he likes it a lot, from what I understand. Or maybe it's Jarrett Moore. And from what I hear, it's great for doing more simplistic coloring, and then your lines will be a little more smooth. Because Photoshop, I always complain about how it doesn't have the line smoothing ability feature built in yet, but I'm assuming in the future they will too. But no, that's one I have not tried.
I actually played with Magna Studio 5 for a
Oh,
while.
you did?
Yeah.
Well, maybe it was you that I'm thinking about then.
The line art in it is amazing. It's really good with line art. The ability to lay out pages as well. It's really good for making just like a form, like a manga. Go figure, right? Like a comic book format. Like it's really good at doing that. Does it have the depth of Photoshop when it comes to coloring? I mean, I would say not as much, but I didn't use it for rendering at all. But as far as like making a comic with it, it's fantastic. You know, the line works great. It's like an upgraded. It's like if Photoshop and Psy were to have a child. Is how I look at it. Tony, ask this! Exclamation point.
Oh, we better ask it.
What's the best thing I can draw to study value and form?
Best thing to study? Is the question?
Yeah.
What is the best thing to study values and form? I guess from my personal opinion, it would probably be the human body, where I think there's so, oops, I don't want to do this underneath. There's so much that you can focus on in terms of the nuances of like little organic edges and seeing how it reacts to light, and even like the knee. There's so many forms being like merged together, and how they butt up against each other, and how you'd have to draw the lighting reacting to that. But if you want to keep it a little more simple, still life is great, especially ones that have kind of a different shaping to it. Like, let me really quick share what I'm talking about. So the other challenge, and I think this is going to be one of the exercises one of the weeks, is draw 3 objects that are on your desk or within your sight right here. So the thing I always have on my desk is the thing that you put the pen in, but if you look at it, it has like these interesting curves and shapes, and you can even see, even with the light outside, how it reacts to light. And there's like a strip of light here, but there's also kind of like a light here, and then the other side, it's catching light on that lip, but not on the very top, and really break down how you're looking at the object and seeing how it reacts to light and how that affects the color as well. And then I guess what are the 2 other objects? I got a Jake mug, so then I guess I could look at that and not only just draw it to make it look like Jake, but make it look like it's actually reacting to the light coming from the window, and that would be another challenge in itself. And then I don't really have anything interesting on my desk. And then probably a pen. I don't have the most interesting desk. Someone asked if I could show what it looks like, but I guess I can't with my built-in webcam. But just know you don't need an office or a desk type area. Like literally, I just have my tablet and my computer here, and that's my office. Let me get back to my drawing now. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to do, then so we got about 25 minutes. I'm going to shade this bent knee here, and then I'm going to talk to you guys a little about something I learned in the past 4 hours.
This is pretty much the last question.
Hi.
What is a good way to learn how to profile? I have problems when it comes to that part. That and recreating my characters.
Profile?
Yeah, I'm guessing they mean like the profile view. So like when someone's looking,
Oh, that's my absolute favorite.
yeah.
That's actually the most fun because you don't have to worry about symmetry. I guess tips on how to do that. When you're drawing your profile, am I masked out? No, I'm not. Okay. So if you think of the head of a sphere, and then profile be here, ear would be about here, and be comfortable with the way that you lay out proportions. So in the back of my head, I know we do like the top of the forehead to the top of the ear, bottom of the ear, bottom of the chin. These three regions should be about the same. And that's something that I think just over the years I've developed where I don't have to draw out the lines anymore. I would look at where that would curve around to where the eye socket would be, down to the nose. The mouth. Then bring it up. So profile is my favorite thing because then you don't have to worry about if the eyes are completely symmetrical. The nose and mouth are a little easier. I would say making sure your eyes aren't too big. I see eyes that are way too big on profiles a lot, but you don't want to do that. Hairline would start about here. I don't know why immediately I just started drawing red. We'll give her a side ponytail today.
Would you say that drawing, like if you're trying to recreate a character, that using grids would be really, really beneficial?
What do you mean?
So like, I know you don't have space on your canvas right now, but if you were to move that over slightly and then draw like a line from the top of the head and the bottom of the head, like those three lines that you drew,
Oh yeah.
and then drawing it over front view on the other side, so that way you're making sure that it matches up.
Oh yeah, especially when I started doing this kind of stuff, absolutely. And then if you keep doing it enough where it's like it's like muscle memory, you don't have to do it. That's kind of the point where you want to hit eventually. So I guess yeah, that's how I do my profile. Got my hook, my Y, and my bump for the ear. And I would just go on, and then I would just keep detailing over and over until I have my profile. And then the other thing is, don't make the head completely smooth. I always love when I see artists make like a bump in the back of the head where it's more flat, and then it kind of bumps around here. I love that, because if you think of the skull, if you look at a skull, they're not like perfectly round. They have a lot of bumps and grooves in them. So having a head that's slightly irregular, I think is super cool to showcase in your work. All right, now I'll get back to my bent knee here.
Anton asks, have you considered doing a live stream on how you draw traditionally? I've seen your traditional drawings on your Von Art blog, and I'm interested in how you drew them.
I've actually been doing research on getting a free motion webcam because I want to show you guys my entire process of sketching from start to finish. And it would probably be like a 6-hour video compressed into 10 minutes, but I find it so important to keep up with your traditional studies as much as your digital, because I really think they do translate and benefit from one to the other. So yes. But a full live stream, I'm sure after I got the camera, I would definitely be down to do a full live stream on just traditional.
I'm Ben J says, I've been doing some of the exercises, and when it comes to blending, how beneficial do you think it is to try and blend and paint all on one layer?
I think that comes down to personal preference, where I used to draw and I used to have like so many layers. And I think over the years I've just gotten either more comfortable or lazy, one of the two. And I usually work on 1 or 2 layers for the entire piece. And then I'll usually save old drafts just in case I really feel like I made a mistake an hour later into my drawing. I'd be like, okay, well, I know I saved it like an hour ago, so I have that layer saved, and I'll just start over again on that layer. But in terms of blending, it's good to just create new layers in case you are trying something new and you want to see if it would work. But I always usually merge that layer down if I feel if it worked. So usually my process usually goes now where I usually work on 2 layers. One layer is my base foundation that I'm really happy with. Then I'll make a new layer and I'll do some experimenting, like I'll do some coloring, and then if I think it looks better than my base layer, I'll merge that layer down to my base, becomes my base, and then I'll make a new layer. And I'll kind of repeat that process over and over again.
This is the last question, and is it? Yeah, it's the last question. It says, from William, it says, how should I work with color and light and shadow? This is my struggle now.
Color and light and shadow?
Yeah, he's the one who cannot see green and red.
How can you work with color? So I guess the easiest way for you to do it would be to do the hue transitioning. See, but this might be tough because oftentimes they're the same value. I would probably save out a palette that you know what the colors are, even have maybe someone tell you or have another artist be able to show you, and then have those color palettes always on hand so you can pull from them. Because I would always recommend like a soft gray or a soft blue to integrate into the shadow areas for color. And then for your light, I would always have like a lighter, very desaturated yellow, or if I'm trying to add more warmth, more of like a warm orange red color. And then if you have it on a palette, even if you're not able to decipher what color it is, if you like memorize those 5 colors in the palette, then you'll be able to pull from them and integrate them into your piece and be able to know that you're not oversaturating something, you're not using colors that don't fit with what you're drawing. So I guess that would be my advice. But then again, I've never worked with someone that's colorblind before, so I'm kind of curious if that actually helps or not.
I would also suggest using the RGB slider, because obviously red is the red slider, green is the green slider, and B is the blue slider. Or if you're using CMYK, but like also knowing what numbers there are on the color picker. You know, like number 0075FD. Like that's kind of a pain in the butt to memorize, but I think it would help out a lot because you would know that red is this number. You know, does that make sense?
Yeah. Either way, I think maybe having a palette might be a little easier.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you only have like 5 colors. If you have a lot of colors, yeah, that might get a little overwhelming.
William says, I mean, how to pick the colors for light and shadow.
Well, I can't give you a definitive answer because when I work with lights and shadows, I often look at the piece that I'm working on and I try to decipher, am I going to have more of a warm color palette for the lighting and shadow, or am I going to have more of a cool? So in your case, what I would do is I would probably have then 2 color swatches, one for warm, 3 actually. That might get a little much. But one where it's like warm, neutral, and cool. And then I would pull from those colors. And for my shadows, I almost always integrate gray in some degree. So that one you can kind of keep similar throughout. But then for your lighting, you really have to focus on, is it the light coming from a sun? Is it coming from a heat source? Is it coming from bounce lighting off snow? Like there's things that you have to incorporate and think about, and it's something that I've never really had to think about. So it is an interesting question, but that's probably how I would do it.
All right, that's all the questions.
Perfect. All right, so then I'm gonna kind of finish up this knee right here. Then I'll talk about what I learned in the last 3 hours, and hopefully I'll be able to get either a tutorial or an exercise on that in the next coming weeks. Although next week will probably be an exercise on joints, something with ankles and wrists and knees, all the forgottens of the human anatomy. I guess the other announcement that I found out earlier this week, if you are from the Midwest area, and you, particularly if you're in Wisconsin, I will be at Anime Milwaukee in February, around mid-February, and I will be there for the entire weekend. So if you want to come meet me and we can talk, and I can talk to you for however long about all the nerdy stuff that I'm into and possibly you're into as well.
Oh, that just threw me off a little bit. Like you were erasing, and it wasn't erasing with like a lower layer.
Oh yeah, I know, that threw me off at first too.
I was like, what?
Where is that lower layer? Oh, there you are. Maybe I'll just hide it. No, I need that. And the reason I'm mentioning that is I got 2 requests to go to conventions that are outside my state region, and I couldn't make one of them, but the other one I will be able to make, and that one was in Canada. So I think if you guys have any conventions near you that maybe could be a possibility for me to come to, I would love to, because I'm kind of in a convention traveling mode and have been for like the past 8 months, and I really like it. I really like meeting people in person and giving any advice and kind of talking to people, because I sit at home all day and draw and do tutorials, and while I get to respond to you guys through the internet, sometimes I need that human interaction.
Micah, are you guys going to be making an art book?
Oh God, I would love that.
I know, right?
I've talked to Wes about this, and he actually approved the request. So it's actually not something that's crazy of a thought, where it would be like a compilation, or I would compile all the work that I've done in terms of Concept Cookie and CG Cookie, and that includes like all the tutorials, all the concept art, all the freelance work that I've been given, the game that we made, Eat Sheep, all the concept work that I had to do for that, and then just a lot of how-tos. So it'd be like how to draw hair, how to draw, like in this case, how to draw a knee, how to draw the hand, all those tutorials, how to draw braids, things that we've done in the past 4 years, and we would just compile a collection. So yeah, that would be really cool if we can get that out in 2015.
William wants to know what convention in Canada he would love to meet you.
Let me check. It is called Fan Expo. Oh, if you're from Canada, that is awesome. I've admittedly never been outside of the States yet, so next year is going to be a lot of traveling for me. I know for sure I'm going to Australia and Canada, and then possibly Wales in the summer. But eventually, and I'm hoping, maybe not next year, the year after though, I would love to travel Europe and do conventions out there for a while. Like that. There's my knee profile. So now from here, I can see, okay, something, it still doesn't look quite as accurate as I would want. So then, rather than force something to look right, I'm going to use reference. I'm going to go to my image search. Let's do knee bent 90 degrees. Go to images, and then there we go. So we have a few references that I can use. I know you guys can't see it, but a lot of workout positions. But you can then see exactly how the knee would react to lighting, how the muscles and all the bones bend and move when it's at a 90-degree angle opposed to just a straight leg. So actually, let me pull one of them in so you can see what I'm talking about.
Ooh, that's a nice lunge.
Yep. So I'm going to also be teaching fitness. So the one thing I noticed right away, my leg way too smooth. Because I know sometimes with fitness people, they have a little more exposed muscle being seen on the outside. Or not exposed, but like you can see the underlying muscle underneath. But in this case, I really like the way that this line right here kind of shapes out that teardrop. So on my knee, I can look at it and be like, okay, well, I want to recreate that to some degree. And this is what I mean by using reference to your advantage. Because then without this reference, I probably wouldn't have added this. But with reference, I will. And I know that when you're using reference, you have to be really careful with your light sources. Now, with my two knees that I've done, I have a very pillow shading where it's not like a very intense light scheme going on. I don't have like a 3-point lighting system. It's very broad, basic, almost bland, I might even say. So what I could do, I could kind of recreate the way that the knee in the reference is lit as well. But when you're using reference, and if you do have a light source in what you're working on, you want to try to find a reference that kind of depicts the lighting scenario you already depicted in your scene or on your figure.
Do you know what city that convention is going to be in Canada?
I can find out. Let me check.
All right.
It is in Toronto. So if you just Google Fan Expo Canada, you'll be able to see all of it, all the information.
All right, that's it for questions.
Wonderful. But still feel free if you guys have questions. We got about 9 minutes. And I also want to thank, if there's anyone that's watching that joined the workshop that's starting in January, it just filled up this morning. So we have a full class of 15 students, and I'm really looking forward to working with you guys.
It's going to be fun.
And Joe will be the moderator for that as well. And we'll have a good time. I'd probably continue blending this, but I also want to talk, I forgot the thing that I learned this morning that I wanted to share with you guys. All right, so if you've kind of been following these live streams or know what kind of artist I am, I always admit to how much I struggle with fur. And this morning, or before the live stream, I should say, I was trying to do research on how I could better my understanding of fur, and I'm applying it to one of my new pieces. So let me go ahead and share that out really quick. All right, so I'm assuming if you guys watch Digimon, you know who these two are. But the thing that I struggled with was doing the fur on Gabumon. And this is what it looked like originally, where it looks really flat. But I wanted to give the impression of fur, since I'm going for like a semi-realistic blending and shading style, even on proportions that aren't on a realistic level. So I found these brushes and this demo that this artist did, and I want to share it with everyone because I think if doing creature stuff is something that interests you, I want to give this artist as much credit as possible. Their name is, maybe I'll just write it out too. And the brushes are free. They're free to use, and he has I don't know if it's a he or a she, but they have a demo included in the brush package, along with the brushes and their tips on how to do it. So they have a full 2-page tip on how to do it. So it's Coyote Mange, I believe, and they do a lot of the fur and animal creature study stuff, and it was able to give me results like this in literally like 1 or 2 brush strokes. So let me show you, I'll make them really big. So here's one of the brushes, where not only does it have the transfer, shape dynamics, and scattering, but it has a color dynamic. So there's a slightly lighter hue being integrated and a slightly darker hue being integrated. And the other one that I've been using, because I literally just found this like an hour before the stream started, and then so I haven't been able to fully play with them, but the ones that I've used have been super helpful and have given me the look that I've been wanting to achieve. And this will honestly help me then in future creature pieces whenever I need to draw fur. So the one thing that you have to do when you're trying to learn something that you're not familiar with is you almost have to swallow your pride and be like, okay, I don't know how to do this, and I've been struggling to do it on my own. Let me hear what other people have to say that they know how to do it and hear their advice on it. So I looked at the internet. DeviantArt, of course, was my go-to, and of course there was this really good one right away. And now I'm able to use this fur brush, and I'll be able to use it for all my future pieces. But I wanted to credit this artist because I think it's important to be able to look at something that you struggle with and be like, I need advice. And I think having that that sense of it's okay to admit that I can't do something on my own or that I struggle to do it on my own. And I want you guys to at least even see that even I do it to this day. I still try to better myself in the areas that I struggle in. And I hope I continue to do that for the rest of my career, and I hope you guys do that throughout yours as well. Okay, so I think I'm going to cut off the stream, and the last thing that I wanted to share with you guys is there was a tutorial that was posted this morning that I did last week. Let me see if I can find it. There we go. So pretty much the tutorial was about using a base sketch to create character concept art, and I talk about how I created these two skeleton brushes, and I can use them because I have them on point now whenever I want, and how to use them over and over again for the basis for your character stuff. And I talk about what character concept art is and how you're not trying to detail light and color, you're trying to imply shape and form just through flat coloring, and you're really trying to get the concept across in a quick amount of time, and you're not supposed to go on to detailing. So your focus is on creating an interesting silhouette and something that's recognizable and adheres to the environment that they're in. So if this is a tutorial that might interest you, it is now online on Concept Cookie, and you should check it out. And in terms of other announcements, I believe we have the exercise review post this Friday, and then we have 2 tutorials that will be coming out this month from other authors that we have contacted, and I'm looking forward to releasing those. So I think that's all we have. Joe, is that all the questions we've got?
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. I want to thank you guys for coming to this live stream. We do these every Wednesday at 2 p.m. and that's Central Time, and that's -5 GMT outside of the States. And hopefully we will see you guys next week. All right. Bye, everyone.
See you guys.